The Israel-Palestinian war has been in the news for over a month now, but this isn't the first time. It's been happening for decades now, and to understand the present, we need to understand the past. In this episode and the next, we will be discussing the Israel-Palestinian war, but first, we take a historical perspective today, and then next week, we look at what's happening currently with the Israel-Palestinian war.
Welcome everybody, and today we're going to be taking a historical background of the Israel-Palestinian war. And just as KB has said in the introduction, it's been going on for a long time. And I think KB, it goes back to what year, Seth? 1917, right? During the Ottoman Empire, when the Ottoman Empire was alive as at then.
It goes back all the way to the First World War.
Exactly.
That's where, I mean, most people think back to 1948, the aftermath of the Second World War, but then the seeds of the current problem, not just in Palestine, but in the Middle East as a whole, were actually sown during the First World War.
Yeah, but it actually goes back beyond 1,000 years, beyond 2,000 years, in fact.
What do you mean by that?
Based on the holy books that we know, the Abrahamic religions, right? Let me leave it at Abrahamic religions. Israel believed that they were taken out from Egypt by Prophet Moses so that they can go to their promised land, which the promised land is Palestine, which they took over during that time, right? Now, that is where the whole mindset of Israelis are when it comes to them dominating the area that Palestine has occupied.
Is that really it?
Yeah, if you look at it, based on historical documentations and all that, Israelis believe that it is theirs to take. Palestine has been promised by God to them. That's what they believe as Jews. But everybody knows, even from the inception of time, that land is Palestinian owned.
Now that you brought this up, it just made me remember something. Obviously, this was a form of settlement, from outsiders into a place that was not theirs originally.
No, based on recent history, right?
Yeah.
Based on
okay. Actually, happened, like you said, recent history. If you want to follow that recent history, did you know that Uganda was offered to the Jews as a place of settlement before they insisted on Palestine?
Mm-hmm.
So if this was the case, they wouldn't have even debated it. They would have outrightly refused it. But then it was a matter of debate and stuff. Okay, should we resettle these people in? All the aim of this was that they wanted a country, not a country, a national home is the word that they use, is the phrase that they use for Jews. Now, and you know that Jews all over the world, no matter where you come from, whether you're American, you're Nigerian or whatever, if you go to Israel, it's like a homecoming for you. You have free access into Israel as long as you're a Jew, right? So that was their vision, in the entire place. And we will go further. We will look at why all those things happened in the first place. Because in Europe, the Jews were very, very much hated, and they are even. I mean, I would this is a serious matter, but then I will bring in a joke that I once heard on a sitcom, where they said that Jews were involved in literally all major wars in history, basically. So,
conspiracy theorists have started again. Theorists have started again.
So, that was part of the whole reason for the Nazism movement initially and all those type of things in the first place, because they felt like the Jews were grabbing a lot. trying to control everything, and some people, it didn't really sit right with some people. And then there was like an increased persecution of Jews in Europe, and then they felt like, okay, we need a place that we can come call our own, basically. Mind you, the um the religious aspects of what's it called of the whole promised land thing was not was it was Moses that was meant to like deliver them to the promised land, right? Which
Yes.
happened.
Yes.
Which happened. But then why are they now coming to come and claim this land as their own now? A land that is occupied by a different set of people.
Which means they lost. They kind of. It was given to them. They took it by right thousands years ago. They took it, but they scattered and left the place. You get?
They scattered and
They
left.
scattered
Then
and
why did
left.
they now, why
Like
did they
which
now want to come back?
exactly? Which means they were irresponsible. They are a set of. They are a bunch of irresponsible people. They left their own mandate and left, and they allowed the Palestinians to reclaim what was originally theirs, right? And now they are trying to retake it by force, which, with the help of the United Nations and UK, they did, right? Because if you look at it, right, Britain took control of the area following the defeat of the Ottoman Empire. Now, do you
Yes.
like before then the Ottoman before the
The
First
Ottoman
World War?
Empire was completely split up to like different like
Yes, exactly.
nations and everything, yeah.
Yes. So the land was inhabited by a Jewish minority and Arab majority. Just
Yes.
get this,
As
right?
at the time,
Mm,
the population of um Palestine was 90% Arab and 10% Jewish.
exactly. So now this is where
Yeah.
things started to like tension started to happen, right? Tension between the two peoples, right, grew with when the international community gave the UK the task of establishing a national home in Palestine for Jewish people.
The,
So
international community did not give them a task.
they
They
they did
decided to come up with it.
they did actually.
This was this you are familiar with the Balfour Declaration, right?
Yeah, that happened in 1917, right? Which
Of 1970.
exactly Balfour Declaration of 1917, a pledge that made the Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Britain's Jewish community. So the declaration was enshrined in the British mandate over Palestine and endorsed by the newly created League of Nations. And guess what? Forerunner of the United Nations in 1922.
Okay. First of all, the victor goes the spoils, right? We just talked about like the loss of power of specifically the Ottoman Empire. You understand? And you know, around that region, around that period rather, we started having the discovery of oil and stuff like that. That is when the interest in that particular region even began to like heat up. You understand? So the Balfour Declaration, like you said, like we just talked about, was that it committed that the British government was going to establish in Palestine a home for the Jewish people, and the British government had to achieve this objective at all costs. Basically, that was essentially what it was all about. And like, okay, this was over 100 and something years ago, like let's say 105 years, I guess 106 years ago. So this declaration now, okay, let's put it this way. Imagine now you are in your home, right? Then somebody from somewhere decides that they are going to move some people from another house, a house that, let's say, the house caught fire. They're going to move them from that house into your house, and that house is going to be their new house, basically, while you are still there. As much as, even though you want to, let's say even if you want to like help out those people, the fact that somebody's unilaterally taking that decision on your behalf is going to anger you to an extent, right?
Very true.
Which is essentially what happened with this thing. They, like I said, it was a Balfour Declaration. It was a declaration. It's not like as if they are even like saying, okay, should we do this? Should we do this? They just declared that this is what's going to happen. They're going to create a national home for Jewish people in Palestine. And this pledge or this declaration
But if you
is
remember, that as at that point, right, Palestine was not also a nation. It was just an area, not necessarily a nation, because it was given up by the Ottoman Empire. So at that point, the area was just for nobody. You get?
it may not have been recognized
Exactly.
as a nation
I
in
think
the
that's
in the eyes of like normal, will I say, the normal international bodies and whatnot, right? But then the fact that you have, this is essentially the same thing that happened with the US, right? When they discovered the new world, in quotes,
mhm.
because it was not like a nation on the map or whatever, that kind of thing. It's allowed them to just go in, oppress the native Indians that were already there, the Native Americans, let me put it that way. They oppressed them, kept on like taking their land and taking their land and taking their land till those people became a minority today.
Yeah.
And then this is essentially kind of like the same thing that
Actually,
happened. But
that's
then the
that's
only
very
difference
true.
at that point, there were now stricter laws concerning those type of things. You understand? Like, oh, you can't just go in and colonize a place, or that kind of thing. Back then there were still colonial masters. In fact, the fact that these things even happened was because of even like the fact that France, England, all those countries were still colonial masters. In fact, even in that particular war, Arabs fought against Arabs, because if you think about it, we had the countries that were still in the Ottoman Empire, like there were like a lot of Arabs there. Then you now had the Arabs of North Africa, which were being controlled by European countries like France and England, for example, fighting against their fellow Arabian brothers, basically, because of this kind of colonialism and whatever. So colonialism was still a thing then, but then nobody was still going to colonize. Nobody was actively colonizing any place at that point, right? It's just like, okay, we'll still be in control of you guys till you're able to gain your independence, blah 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 blah. It's essentially the same thing that happened with that region. So that aside, they now decided that, okay, with everything that is going on, let us start transporting, let me put it that way, transporting Jewish people over to Palestine. So um what did I want to say? Okay, so they now started this whole mandate, basically, that will facilitate that immigration, right? It started like between between like it started around that 1917 time, but then between 1922 and 1935 now, that was even like the years before the World War II. The Jewish population, right, in Palestine rose from less than 10% to around 27% of the population, total population. So, meaning that, okay, they started introducing Jewish people, right? And introducing Jewish people, and it was not like I said, okay, they say, okay, just come and stay here. They were like pushing people out of their lands, out of their homes, and stuff like that, because they want to resettle Jewish people into that place. So it was one of the most controversial declarations, one of the most controversial documents ever, because somebody from somewhere decided to take a decision on your behalf. It was a European power talking about a non-European authority territory. You understand? And without taking into consideration what the people in that territory think about their decision, they decided to transport people who are not indigenous to that territory into that territory and expect it to be okay, right?
So quick question. I'm going to ask the
Mm,
listener something, right? After we are done with this episode, I want you people to answer one question for us, right?
okay.
For the next episode. Are Palestinians being oppressed? That's the number one question. And that's the only question. Because again, I'll say this, continue what to add to what KV has said, violence between that 1920s and 1940s, number of Jews like arriving at that Palestinian area grew, right? Especially because of the Nazi Holocaust, right, in World War II. Now, violence between Jews and Arabs against British rule also increased, and in 1947 it even became worse, right? Guess what? The United Nations voted for Palestine to be split into separate two separate states, Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem
Yes.
becoming an international city. Now, that plan, now this is I'm going to run through this, right? That plan was accepted by Jewish leaders but rejected by
By
the
the
Arab
Arabs.
by the Arabs, right? And it was
Obviously.
never implemented. Note that it was never implemented. Now, in 1948, like unable to solve the problem, right? Britain, see the confusion, right? Britain came in 1917. They created problem, and then 1948, because they were not able to solve the problem, they withdrew.
Hmm.
They withdrew, and Jewish leaders declared the creation of the state of Israel as a country. That's one,
Yeah.
right? That's one. It was intended to be a safe haven for Jews fleeing persecution, as well as a national homeland for Jews, right? Guess what? Palestinian is being in the background, right? Fighting between Jewish and Arab militias has been intensifying for months, and the day after Israel declared statehood, 5 Arab countries attacked them.
Exactly.
You get Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. You understand? Then we now come down all these whole
You're
numbers of
very
people dying, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled and were forced out of their homes in what they call today they call it Al Nakba, or the catastrophe. You understand?
Yes.
That was
As-
then.
Essentially the Arab version of Holocaust.
Yes, exactly, right? Now, Jordan occupied land which became known as the West Bank, and Egypt occupied Gaza, right? Then, now, Jerusalem was divided in between Israeli forces in the west and Jordanian forces in the east. Because there was never a peace agreement, there were more wars and fighting in the following decades. Yeah. So all these things has been that you're seeing now has been happening for a long time, for a long period
Exactly.
of time. You understand? And in a war in 1967, bam, Israel occupied East Jerusalem and the West Bank, as well as most of Syrian Golan Heights in
And
Gaza and the
yeah,
Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. Now, most Palestinian refugees and their descendants live in Gaza and the West Bank, as well as in neighboring Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon as well. Now, neither they nor their descendants have been allowed by Israel to return to their homes. Israel says this will overwhelm the country and threaten its existence as a Jewish state. That's one. I mean, that's another point. Now, Israel still occupies the West Bank and claims the whole of Jerusalem as its capital, while the Palestinian claims the East Jerusalem as the capital of a hoped for future Palestinian state that till today it has not been created. The US,
yeah,
United States, is one of only a handful of countries to recognize the city as Israel's capital. In the past 50 years, Israel has built settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, right, where more than 700,000 Jews now live. Settlements are held to be illegal under international law. That's the settlements that over 700 people are staying in the East Bank, right? They are
yeah.
illegal. That is the position of the United Nations Security Council and the UK government, amongst others, although Israel rejects this. Now,
You get this whole point now.
now,
You see, even areas that were will I say, ceded to the Palestinians are still being occupied by Israel. When this whole thing was happening, but obviously, if somebody is like, okay, I even gave the example of discovery of USA, for example, of America. When those things were happening, they were after fertile lands and all the best places, right? You're coming from only God knows where, and then you're coming into my land and you want to come and take all the best possible. And that's essentially what happened. They took the areas, they made sure they occupied more of the areas that had like more fertile lands, that had water, the areas with rivers and all those things, the areas that are near coasts, all those type of things. So how do you even expect in the first place for people to even be happy about that? And when that whole Balfour Declaration was even initially issued, like people were even asking, like people were like, okay, people now rather, and I even wondering like why was it even issued in the first place? You understand? Like what is the reason behind it? So there are some people have different theories. Some people say that, oh, there are Zionists in the governments of Europe back then, especially the British government, and then while some were saying that the declaration was even like anti-Semitic in nature, based on Jews are causing problem in Europe, so let us carry them somewhere else to solve the problem, right? That kind of thing. But then according to the academics, basically most of the academic articles that you read about this thing, you find out that okay, the reason for all those type of things is like there are four main reasons, and number one is that, which is probably the main reason for it, is that the imperialists basically wanted to keep control of Palestine. It was strategic to them because they wanted to monitor, to keep their strength, or let's say keep their grip on Egypt and the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal has been very, very important to them for a long time. Their interests was very, very, very heavy there, and they also wanted to then. Also, there's another reason being that they wanted to side with the Zionists so that they could rally support among the Jews in the United States and Russia, basically, so that because the war was going on at that time, right? So they wanted that support from them so that they would say, okay, we are trying to do something for you guys. You guys should come and help us in this war, this kind of thing. And there was obviously some form of lobbying from Zionists also that had strong connections to the British government, and then also, like we mentioned like earlier, that Jews were being persecuted in Europe as at the time. So all those reasons were part of what led to all these things. But then, like you said earlier, the people did not accept it because why should they accept it, right? And all these things kept going down and going down and going down, and in the end,
Calm down, calma. Let me take over from there, right? So now, like, let's stick to historical, right? As today's episode is based on historical background, right? Now, from the whole war that was happening and all those stuff that was happening in 1967 and all that thing, right? Now, in come Gaza, the Gaza Strip. Gaza Gaza was like it's a narrow strip of land, right? That is sandwiched between Israel and the Mediterranean Sea, but with a short southern border with Egypt. It is just 41 kilometer long and 10-kilometer wide. It has more than 2 million inhabitants and is one of the most densely populated places on earth. Very important, very, very important. In the wake of
yes,
1948 and 1949 war, Gaza was occupied by Egypt for 19 years. 19 years. Israel occupied Gaza in the 1967 war and stayed until 2005. During that time, building Jewish settlements. Israel withdrew its troops and settlers in 2005, though it retained control over its airspace, shared border, and shoreline. The United Nations still considers the territory to be occupied by Israel. Can you imagine? Let's.
mm.
Hey God, this is very complicated.
Because so
Like,
the
see, Bob,
what resulted in, like you mentioned, like okay, the air, there's basically a blockade on all fronts, land, sea,
yes.
and air. Basically,
Mm.
some people have described Gaza right now as an open air prison, right? Basically, because of
That's what it is.
Yes, because of these blockades that they've created
Mm-hmm.
on land, in the sea, in the air. Like, if you even want to leave Gaza, there's a point that if you enter water, let's say even if it is swim that you want to swim safe, you want to swim away from Gaza, if the point that you reach, you'll be blocked by Israeli forces basically, and maybe either captured or killed or something like that.
Mm. So now,
More
right,
time,
right. See,
basically.
see,
So, continue.
yeah. So out of all this, the main problems between Israelis and Palestinians are four, right? You can add more. Based on my own opinion, there are four, right? And for me, they include what should happen to Palestinian refugees. That's number one. In all those, in other settlements, right? Then two, whether Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank of Jerusalem should stay or be removed. Number three, whether the two sides should share Jerusalem or not. Nobody wants to relent. No, nobody wants to give control of Jerusalem. And perhaps the most tricky of everything is whether a Palestinian state should be created alongside Israel.
Mm.
So there have been efforts that has been made to resolve these problems, right? Israel-Palestinian peace talks were held on and off between 1990s and the 2010s. If you're interested in this, right, go and watch the Oslo Accords, Oslo movie rather. Um, Go and watch Oslo movie. You can find it anywhere, right? Now, during that period in the 1990s, I mean 1993, yes, a negotiated peace did seem possible in early days. In the early days, a series of secret talks in Norway became the Oslo peace process, now also called Oslo Peace Accords. It is symbolized by a ceremony on the White House lawn in 1993, presided by President Bill Clinton as at then. It was a historic moment because the Palestinians recognized the state of Israel and Israel recognized its historical enemy, the Palestine Liberation Organization, as the sole representative of the Palestinian people. Now, the PLO is a self-governing Palestinian authority that was set up then. But, but, cracks soon appeared though, because then during that period there was the opposition leader Benjamin Netanyahu, right, calling Oslo. He called Oslo, Norway, basically a mortal threat to Israel, right? So now that entirely now just created a problem because it's Oslo that kind of mediated this whole agreement of PLO and Israel. So the Israelis accelerated their project to settle Jews again in the occupied Palestinian territories. See, just imagine something. They violated the rules, the accords that were created in 1993 in the Oslo Accords. Now, the recently emerged Palestinians, the recently emerged Palestinian militant group Hamas sent suicide bombers to kill people in Israel and wrecked the chances of a deal. That was in the 90s, early 90s, right, and early 2000s. Sorry, late 90s and early 2000s. Now, the atmosphere in Israel turned ugly, culminating in Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin's assassination by a Jewish extremist on 4th of November 1995. In the 2000s, in the 2000 attempt, in the 2000s, an attempts were made to revive the peace process, including in 2003 when a roadmap was devised by world powers with the ultimate goal of a two-state solution, but this was never implemented. Again, see, never see this whole the theme of Israel and Palestine has been never implemented, never implemented, never implemented. Like out of everything I've said today in this episode, I've read more than five never implemented. You get? Now, peace efforts finally stalled in 2004 when talks failed between the Israelis and Palestinians in Washington. The most recent peace plan prepared by the US when Donald Trump was president was called the deal of the century by Prime Minister Netanyahu, but was dismissed by the Palestinians as a one-sided and never got off the ground. Again, never implemented. And then that's full stop. We are now back to where we are last month. So, KB, this
Yeah.
this matter this matter no go finish.
There's actually a lot that needs to be said. I even have like some disagreements with some of the stuff that you said. There are like key parts that we missed out on,
Like
and
which
I'm
one?
not even sure whether we will have enough time to even like pick those things. But then, however, I would try. Basically, let me just like try to cover up something. We're talking about the history essentially. We jumped basically. Okay, what happened after this whole declaration was already put into place? Like we already talked about how they rejected it, and how how the Israelis basically like entered the land and stuff. But then we didn't really talk about how like the Arabs in the area actually revolted for 3 years, even before the World War II even started. Between 1936 to 1939,
Mm-hmm.
the Arabians revolted basically. In April 1936, there was a committee that was formed, the Arab National Committee, which basically involved some countries, and they called on Palestinians to basically go on strike, right? To make sure that they do not make any payments of taxes to the British government, and then also encourage them to like boycott Jewish products, so that they in order to protest that colonialism basically that they were experiencing at that point. But then the strike was brutally punished, right, by the British government basically, because during that period they went on a massive campaign of arrests, and then also made sure to demolish people's houses basically. Like if you were against it, they demolish your house basically, and ensured that they just had that very tight grip on the situation. So the strike actually lasted for 6 months, but then you know with all the efforts that the British made, it was eventually squashed, and they basically like went again, they revolted again, and over time, it had been that was even before the whole partition plan that you were even talking about like splitting Palestine into two, giving the Palestinian states and the Israeli states, basically, like you even mentioned in the first place. But then, like you said, it was not really implemented, basically, because the Palestinians actually rejected it. Because why did they even reject it in the first place? Because they wanted to allot 55% of the Palestinian land to the Jews that they just brought in, people that are not from there. They just brought it, and they wanted to give 55% of the land. It's like you having a company now. You try to build a company, and then somebody from nowhere decides, and like he didn't buy shares or whatever, just came down, just come in, he just comes in and claims 55% ownership of your business.
This is what we call hostile takeover.
Yeah. So at that time, the population of Palestine as a whole was 67% Arab, right? Like 7% of like the indigenous the indigenous people of Palestine were 67% in that place as at that time. Then they had more of the land, yeah. They actually had more of the land. They had about 90% of the land as at that time, but they wanted to like cut it down to 55. You mentioned the Nakba also, which happened around like 1948.
Yeah.
How did it really happen, basically? Like, yes, it's a Nakba in itself means catastrophe, like you aptly mentioned. And these Zionists that had now occupied Palestine basically started having paramilitary organizations where they started embarking on military operations to start, destroying Palestinian towns and villages, just for the purpose of expanding the 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 land basically that was being controlled by the Zionist states, the borders of the Zionist states, if you will. So hundreds of people were being killed, and and even more people were being displaced over that period of time. And in the end, at the end of that Nakba period, like over 15,000 Palestinians were killed, and an estimated 750,000 Palestinians were displaced, were forced out of their homes, basically. So today, I know that this is a history, but then today, those people now, those 750,000 people that we're talking about, their descendants live as 6 million refugees within their country, within their nation, and outside their nation. Basically, they are scattered across refugee camps in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, and in Egypt. You have them all over the place. When they were just there in their own land. And do you know the funny thing is that these people were just on their own. They're like a country that's, imagine a country like I don't know, let me not even mention any country, but then imagine a country that is just like, you don't even consider the country, you don't even know that the country even exists. I know you can think of a number of them in Europe and Asia, even in
Yeah.
Africa, so you can a number of them. But then they're just like there, nothing. You don't hear anything coming out from there. You don't hear anything entering there, and then all of a sudden they just have some stuff just like thrown on them and everything. So that is even like what's even like very very crazy about this whole thing, because like these people were just on their own, and then they just came. Some people with their own wahala, and like just came. So after that Nakba, like there were like 150,000 Palestinians that were still around, and that's like Israel newly created Israeli states, right? And then we talked about how Egypt took over Gaza Strip, how
Yeah.
Jordan over West Bank and stuff like that, and in how the PLO was also formed, and then after the PLO was formed, there was also another party. There was a political party that was formed too after, which was the Fatah. Fatah was also formed
Yeah.
like 1 year after PLO was formed.
Mm-hmm.
The PLO is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. I know we mentioned it earlier, but let me just mention it again. So after all those people, we started having the war. In fact, the famous 6 Day War occurred, but then let's not even go into that. So there was basically an uprising, basically like in 1987. After all that, and they refer to it as the Intifada. Intifada is basically like rebellion,
Yeah.
basically. The Intifada basically happened like in December of 1987, and initially there were some Palestinians that were killed in this thing. It was basically like, it's kind of like similar to what happens in Plateau State from time to time. Something might happen that might not be related to anything, but then because of the fact that you have like people that do not really agree with each other, you understand? Let's say maybe something happened between them. Let's say when one person kills the other person, they will not want to know what's happened. They will say that, oh, it's because of these differences that we have. That's why this person killed this other person and stuff like that. So what even happened was that, like, it was, like, call it an accident, I guess. They called it an accident. So 4 Palestinians were killed, basically. It was an Israeli truck that basically like collided with a truck that was carrying Palestinian workers, and then people died. Then protests started, and that was what led to the Hamas movement in the first place. The Hamas movement was like it was basically like it was an armed resistance group basically against the Israeli occupation, and um, Israel too now decided to, okay, we want to try us, let us do our own back. So they had a very very strong response to that, and they had what they call the break their bones policy. So what they basically did was they, they killed they killed people, the Palestinians. They made sure that any activist that was against the Israeli occupation was basically either captured or deported. They continued doing that whole demolition of homes that I talked about earlier. Then also they even went as far as closing universities, basically. You know the implication of that basically now. Like breeding ignorance in a population. You understand?
Yeah.
Let us educate people. Let us not allow people to get educated, right? That kind of stuff. Like it's one of like the very, very basic ways to control an area. So it was mostly, and part of the reason why that even happened was because it was young Palestinians that were like even leading this whole rebellion that we're even talking about. Even in most places where you even see protests and those like around the world, usually it's young people that you normally see there. So the following year, the Arab League recognized PLO as the sole representative of the Palestinian people, and then um, according to an Israeli human rights organization, there were about 1,070 Palestinians that were killed by Israeli forces during that uprising that we're talking about. And 200, over 200, 200 and over 200 were children, right? So aside from that, there were over 175,000 Palestinians arrested in that period.
Hmm.
It was not funny, like they really rounded up these people and like treated them very badly. That was all this happened before we now even got to those Oslo Accords that we're even talking about. I'm not going to like go into that again because we've already like covered it. After the Oslo Accords had been made and everything, there was another uprising. There was another rebellion that was in the early 2000s, basically, and this had to do with especially the this disagreement between them over that sharing of Jerusalem, right?
Yes.
And more importantly, especially to Muslims, right? The most important aspect of Jerusalem is the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Yes.
It's the third holiest mosque in Islam, right? So like it's a very prestigious mosque, and like it holds a lot of history. Every Muslim knows the significance of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this had to do with it because there was like a politician that made a provocative visit to that mosque with a lot of soldiers basically being deployed in that mosque and then around the old city of Jerusalem. And there were now a lot of clashes between Palestinian protesters and then these Israeli soldiers that we're talking about. So, death toll and injuries, that kind of thing. So as expected, those this thing like, and you also mentioned something about like the settlement being like illegal, right, under international law and stuff like that.
Yes, it is.
So when that Oslo Accord that you were talking about was signed, there were 110,000 Jewish settlers in that West Bank, right? And West Bank was part of the, like we said earlier, part of what was even supposed to be ceded to Palestine in the first place.
Exactly.
But then there's 10,000 Jewish settlers in West Bank, right? And that included East Jerusalem, right? So today now we even have more than 700,000, right? We have more than 700,000
settlers,
Jewish
yes,
living there. You understand?
Yeah.
So this whole thing is from there we now even started talking about this whole blockade and everything, and let me just put a stop here because I think it will be better for me to continue with the
so we'll leave that to next week's episode. So yeah,
from next we will just pick up from the blockade that we even talked about earlier.
yes,
How that led to what we have
today
currently, because even before this current conflict that is happening right now, there have been 4 protracted incursions into Gaza by Israeli forces basically. We'll pick up from there and then we'll land in what is happening currently.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to ask you: do you think that Palestinians are being oppressed or not? Give us your wholehearted response. Religious, unbiased, everything you have to say, just say it out. Okay? And We'll talk about these questions next episode before we go deep into what's happening, right? And we can even make the episode just around your comments and your questions or your whatever you had to say. That would be perfect for us.
Okay, so that's it for today's episode. We hope that you have some deep introspections after listening to this, and then also look out for the next episode where we conclude this topic. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.